Our next speaker is Lawrence Larry. He has a talk entitled Inside Out, and he's going to generously share his incarceration and reentry story with us. So, Lawrence, thank you so much for being with us and welcome.
Thank you for having me. This is my first time ever doing anything like this, so in advance, I'd ask you to forgive me due to time restraints and those restrictions. I've written down the things that I would like to share. I grew up in the southeastern district of San Diego's inner city, littered with drugs, gangs, and crime. As far as the house I grew up in, it was just as dysfunctional as the streets. Maybe even more so considering what I know now. It was very hard. So at the age of 14, I decided that I would sell drugs with the rest of my friends to buy things that I felt that I needed. It wasn't long before I started my life of incarceration, as well as becoming a parent at 15. And as far as the gang goes, we all grew up going to the same schools, going to the same parks, so it all was a given. My criminality increased, my desires grew, and my addictions started to compound, giving birth to all forms of negative energy. My time as a free man wasn't long before I found myself standing underneath a murder charge at 23 years old, where I was ultimately convicted, sentenced to 16 years to life. My worst nightmare. I was so confused, yet prepared for incarceration. However, nothing in great detail could prepare me for prison. I walked in fresh, new, but in reality, I've been here before. I've seen a lot of these faces along my journey, but despite the overfamiliar surroundings and people, I couldn't prepare for what I saw, how I felt, and the things that I had to endure. The adjustments never stopped, just like a clock. I walked into prison with the same destructive, selfish, distorted way of thinking, and that street mentality that I carried with me had an adverse effect on my mental and emotional state in prison. Because my norm didn't fit in a prison where time and space had to be respected by all. So I found myself in prison, meaning going to the hole, which is solitary confinement, for various different things, fighting, conspiring, riots, you name it. And it's hard to have hope in a place where the hopeless dwell. So I went to a level 4 prison, which is a prison where they have to keep a closer eye on you, more of a more secure setting. I went to a level 4, which is one of the highest, to a level 3, which is underneath that, which is lesser security and more programming. And then I went back up to a level 4 because I couldn't get my act together and I continued in my ways. So this time they put me in the maximum security prison where I had to be monitored a little bit more closely and less time outside, where there was little to no movement at all. In the rare times administration allowed us to go outside, someone was stabbed, sometimes killed. I knew that as long as I stayed in that particular prison, I would be deeper in troubled times. I came to the conclusion when I was in the hole, and every inmate's canteen was being withheld up to a week after we had all went to canteen to shop for food and items that we felt that we can buy under those circumstances. And our protests and grievances wasn't being heard by the administration. So we became disruptive, kicking the doors, attempting to get the warden's attention to no avail. But the administration officers came in, escorted everyone outside as they found you in your cell, whether you were dressed or not. And then some guys were underdressed, literally. I saw what was going on because I was upstairs, so I could see when they came in, they were just grabbing guys out their cell as they found them. And so I saw that and I put on every piece of clothing that I could find because it was snowing, It was 2 to 3 inches of snow on the ground, and it was very, very cold outside. So everybody huddled into a nice little huddle to protect the guys that were underdressed. And we were all wondering, like, what was taking them so long, because we were in the hole. So we didn't have anything in those cells, but we all knew why we were sitting outside for so long, handcuffed in the snow for 2 hours. I began to wonder, would I make it? Or will I be even more entrenched in this lifestyle? It was discouraging because there were guys who had less time than I did. And, I had 16 to life. There were guys that were in prison that been there since the 70s with a 7 to life sentence. And they probably were arrested in the late 70s. So the hope that I was looking for didn't reside with them, let alone in the maximum security prison. So I got a job in the kitchen that allowed me to be a critical worker. And that way my points would continue to drop. And due to the lockdowns 9 months out of the year, I needed to work to reduce my custody level so that I can go back to a level 3 and possibly finally get to hug my mother. That was on my mind. So instead of a level 3 just giving me a shot, they sent me to another level 4 as a precautionary measure, just to make sure that I was on the straight to fix my behaviors. And my points were dropping, so a level 3 was shortly to come. California prison is segregated, full of racial tension. And at this time, late 90s, early 2000s, riots were common. I was visited by a parole board commissioner, and he informed me that I have the possibility of parole one day if I started cleaning up and getting into self-help classes, getting some clean time, no write-ups, get my GED, and just overall positive program. So I said, how at a level 4 prison? Because at the time when I got this visit, I was still in the level 4. Well, your points are dropping, he told me, so you'll be transferred soon. And I was. So I was semi-excited and reluctant because of the old guys that have been into the board hearings over a half a dozen times or more in their description and experience. But I had to see, I had to try. So I signed up for anything available when I made it there. NA, AA, critical thinking, anger management, and I got all the letters of support. However, my clean time wasn't extensive enough to set a pattern of good behavior. So on the day I went for my initial hearing, I was given the option to waive that hearing for 3 years or go forward with the hearing. And by doing that, they have the opportunity to tell you, we're going to deny you up to 3, 5, 7, and up to 15 years if they feel you need this kind of work. So I took the initiative and said, okay, I'm gonna waive it for 3 years, give myself a little bit more time, get more help, and continue down that path. And everything was going fine. And I found myself getting more tunnel vision to my desires for release. And others began to notice as well. Some guys were supportive, others looking for a reason to put you on notice or politic on your position of recovery. Basically, guys would sometimes get upset that you're not doing the things that you were doing before, so they would look for a reason or an excuse to inflict harm on you, basically, because they didn't know or care about your future or what you wanted to do. But I managed to surround myself with like-minded individuals, as scarce as it was then, and I prepared. In 2015, I was ready. I got my GED, my self-help classes, my vocational trade, clean time. Everything was a check. I was in year 18. They only gave me 16, so surely I would be given that shot. I was denied another 3 years after I waived it in I believe it was 12. or 10. I was confused. I was hurt. I was angry. I was scared. And I felt like giving up. And I almost did. The parole panel, they wanted me to drop my points to a level 2 now. Are you kidding me? I did. I was upset and I was all those things, but I did as they asked. I just didn't understand. So now I'm off to a level 2. And most level 2s is a lower custody level surrounded by a lot of beds and a lot of young people. And I had solitary confinement issues at that time because I spent at least 19 to 20 years in a cell. So being in a different setting with all these young people running around like kids on sugar. I mean, it was insane, but you adapt. I had a lot of self-doubt. Anger was still there, but this is the course that these commissioners told me to sign up for, and I did. And amazing things started to happen. I began to learn a new way of thinking. I started noticing things and behaviors in people, and I started to understand and apply these coping skills, and I began to put bad things and bad people further out of my life, replacing them with positive, supportive people. The transition is hard because you have to admit that you were wrong, your belief system was wrong, and the behavior you learned throughout your life was wrong in a form of abuse. It's hard to say and admit that I was raised wrong because it wasn't just my house. It was the norm in my neighborhood. It's a norm in many neighborhoods. But the psychological effects can and does at times last a lifetime in people. I continued to take these classes and discover things about me and my behaviors, and I worked hard to be a better person. This time, I have tools to do it. In case help is needed, people were in place I could talk to, and I let go of the stigma of venting to anyone about how I feel. So 2018 comes around, and I'm scheduled to go in front of the parole board. Of course, I'm nervous, but confident because now I'm ready to have a conversation about my past, present, and future with a new perspective. From a realistic standpoint, aware of some of my flaws and willing to be open-minded about the ones I don't see. So I was found suitable for parole. I could not believe it when they said the words. It was like I was back in the dreamlike state I felt when I was arrested. An unbelievable moment. It was a stressful process because I had to wait 150 days to see if the governor of California would oppose the panel's decision, and then I had to get his signature. It was hard to sleep, eat, or do anything because there were instances where the governor opposed and denied the panel's decision in other cases, and so that was on my mind. But it was the longest 150 days of my life. But there I was, July 3rd, 2018. I walked out of prison. I thank God as I walked off prison grounds and got in the vehicle, a friend, and my heart was racing. The challenges began for me immediately before I even ate a meal. My little stepsister was a part of my support system. However, she was fighting drug addiction, and she brought a mystery person, not her husband, another addict. They were high, and she was riding with an ex-girlfriend of mine who was naive to the circumstances. So I didn't know if they had drugs or what they had. I was nervous, angry, and they had no money to drive home so I can go see parole. So the financial challenges didn't even make it 24 hours. Prison provided me with $200 upon release. So I had to put gas in the car, buy something to eat for everyone, and manage the rest to buy basic necessities, soap, toothpaste, razors. Don't forget socks and boxers and these things. I was blessed with some supporters who gave me a financial boost so that I could get started, which I'm grateful for. I was able to finally hug my mother and kiss her. But my mother and sister, they had moved 5 hours away from San Diego. So my visit with them was short. It was definitely a challenge getting employment, but I started working and it was a rush. I was excited. Even at the time, $13.75, I was happy. Public transportation was appreciated. After some time, me and my ex reunited. And as my time of 8 months in the transitional house living was ending, a little panic, stress began to set in because now I had to get out on my own some kind of way. I have a cousin that has a family, no room there. I have a daughter and a grandson that lives here, but there's no room there either. My parole wouldn't allow me to go 5 hours away and live because I was a high-risk parolee. So I ended up moving in with my ex. Now, getting out of prison from a long period of time and immediately getting into a relationship is unrealistic in hindsight. If you've been in this relationship, it's possible, but when a person gets out of prison from a long period of time, that person is trying to find his or her path, enjoy life, freedom, take advantage of positive opportunities, because that is what kept me grounded. Family and friends, they heard you talk about your change. They heard you, speak about these things, but in their minds, most of them, not all, they expect you to pick up where you left off. It's unfortunate. Not because they don't respect your change, but because it's the norm in these communities. And it's what they've seen. It's what people have demonstrated over the years in this cycle. People get out late, they stay to themselves for a little while, then they're back into their old ways. It's how they've always seen me respond in the past. So I understand their view, their position. But my ex and I could not iron out our differences. And this relationship began to jeopardize my freedom with kicking me out. We went through a couple of ups and downs where she kicked me out a couple of times. I went back. But the third time, that wasn't the case. She was intentionally attempting to trigger a response with physical violence and verbal abuse. I naturally opened my toolbox, coping through the drama, and I did that as long as I could. After a year, we parted ways, but before we did, we were arguing one day, and she hit me in the face in a rage. And in that moment, the first thing that I could think about that came to my mind was when I went to the parole board in 2015 and they denied me. In my mind, it was like a eureka moment. That's why, this is why those classes and those tools and those skills are important. Because then if they had let me out without developing skills to cope in this moment, it would have been a very different outcome. And understanding where my triggers and impulsivity lies under the surface, I would have failed in that moment. And on parole, she saw my response was paused as she begged me to fight her back, but it wasn't paused because of my parole or fear of prison, a place where I don't ever desire to return. But let's face it, it wasn't foreign to me. I was paused because I remember being powerless to the same rage that I seen in her eyes. And so I felt sorry for her. I looked at her with empathy and compassion, and I put my things in my car and left. Days prior, I already got a credit check for an apartment. See, I began to save my money just in case this kind of thing would happen. And it did, unfortunately. I could not afford to be a violator of parole as a lifer because the process and consequences was much more heavy for a lifer. A lifer has to appear before the same panel board that found him or her suitable. And that process could take up to 2 years of their life. And they don't have to release you after that. You have to fight for it all over again with limited room for error. So I had to have forward thinking in that situation, and it helped. So I moved in with my grandson's mom for about 5 days until my 1-bedroom was ready. When it was, I was scared. I was alone again. I didn't know what to expect. Didn't know if I could or would make it. It was my first time living alone outside and paying my own bills. But my faith and relationship with God is very unique. And it's brought me through much more than what I described to you all here today. But trying to understand a man or woman that was incarcerated for an extensive amount of time is like solving a Rubik's Cube in 1 minute. There is no blueprint because everybody's time inside is different. Different circumstances, different cases, different races. And for people that walk with life sentences, our view was without any life, literally living dead, full of anger, rage, bad intentions, living every day, willingly standing on the edge. But as I began taking the classes that opened up a new perspective and way of thinking, responding and noticing these warning signs, these false beliefs and false pride, it began to deflate and be replaced with new positive beliefs and thoughts. Naturally, because I began to internalize the information from my recovery classes and reopen my mind and reprogram my mind by this. That process inevitably takes your heart out of any past behaviors and people that maintains that kind of energy. I don't know the statistics, but few lifers ever return to incarceration. And that's for a reason or several. As an ex-lifer, I can honestly say that I never will forget how hopeless I felt and careless I was. The loneliness, the bottled up anger that still haunts me today because walking around with this bottled up energy from before conditions you in the habit of bottling things up aside from anger, which is unhealthy as well. Also, apparently it's left something on me physically because I've been told several times that I'm an unapproachable person. I happen to disagree. At the same time, I'm aware of some of the things that are a giveaway, and I make an effort to soften or loosen up a bit. Well, thank you all for listening, and I'm open to any questions you all may have.
We only have time for a couple of quick questions.
That was amazing, by the way. Thank you so much for sharing. I see a book in the future for you. That's a really good story. Yeah, we do have one question from Live Oak here.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, sir. I am happy to hang out with you anytime. You seem pretty approachable to me. So just wanted to ask you, other than God, and of course, that's a huge presence in a lot of people's life.
Right.
What would you say is another variable that made you different? Because I'm sure there's stories like yours across the prison system, but some folks seem to be able to be resilient like you are, and very laudable and very inspirational.
One of the things that made me move forward in a more, I wanted to be the change, all the changes that you have internally and you start to understand things a little bit different. Those things motivated me to move forward and inspire me to understand that I was going in the right direction. So it's definitely the different revelations that you get from the recovery classes that helps you open up and get a different perspective and understanding of your life and who you are.
We have time for another quick question. Go ahead, Louise.
Lawrence, I just want to say it's not really a question. I just want to commend you for taking that journey because you came from a background that didn't really incentivize you to be as courageous in that direction you've taken. So I just really want to commend you on the courage and your resiliency. I think
Thank
it's
you very much.
amazing.
Thank you.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to stop the questions, but thank you so much, Lawrence. The description of your life brought tears to my eyes, and I just want to tell you that you're unbelievably tenacious and lovable. And
Thanks.
so, and by the way, take a look at the chat. You're getting compliments all over the place. So thank you again.
I thank you all for having me and taking the time to listen to me and invite me here today.
Well, it was a pleasure meeting you.
The pleasure's mine. Thank you.